بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, we're continuing in our lessons on etiquette from the work of Ibn Abdul-Qawwi Al-Hanbali, Manzumat al-Adab al-Shar'iyyat al-Sughra, the minor poem on the Islamic etiquette. And today we'll go from line number 71, with the chapter, the Shaykh begins, Adab al-Tibaba, chapter in relation to the etiquette of medicine and medical treatment. So here the Imam is going to teach us, and what is summarized, the Islamic understanding of medical ethics, medical etiquette, for both the doctor and the patient. And this is a very important topic, because when you read the title and you think about it, what does Islam say about a Muslim doctor? What rules and regulations he or she has to follow? And what about the patient? Us who go to the doctors, if we're not a doctor ourselves, what rules govern our treatment, our seeking the treatment from the doctor, our visits, etc. So it's very important to see throughout this manzuma, this poem, the author brings very unique issues that maybe some people don't have any idea Islam has something to do with it. Like we said, etiquette, the chapter of etiquette, you'll find everything. Islam didn't leave anything, no stone unturned, in teaching us how to behave and how to excel in this world, whether it be regarding the worldly knowledge, our religious obligations, or even the affairs of the akhirah, which is the most important. So to begin with, the subject of medicine, you can divide it into two, that which is to do with the doctor, the tabib himself, and that which is to do with the patient. The author here, rahimahullah, he takes the approach of combining the procedures or the etiquette for the patient, mainly, but also some things related to the doctor. And from the way of benefit, I'll mention something about medicine, because we should know a little bit about Islam and medicine. Islam, as we know, as Muslims, were forerunners in this subject. And the ulama, or scholars, were specialized in medicine as well, authoring books and leading in discoveries of many medical treatments and also procedures or knowledge. And I'll introduce you to just one book, a book amongst the earliest books and manuals about the etiquette of medicine and doctors, Kitab Adab al-Tabib by Ishaq bin Ali al-Ruhawi. He died approximately 319 Hijri, so 1931 CE, 931 CE. 319 Hijri, 931 CE. So we're talking decades, right? Before, or you can say hundreds of years before the Westerners, they knew about a lot of the medical etiquette or ethics that we talk about. And this kitab, Adab al-Tabib, you can find it online, and he's not the only one who wrote about ethics and medical ethics. And things on the topic of this book, what's unique about it, it's not only the fact that it's so old. It's the fact that the Shaykh, the author, he wrote such details that today we would consider standard practice. Right? A lot of things he talks about in there in terms of what the doctor should and shouldn't do. Confidentiality, what kind of temperament does a doctor have to have. And the most unique of the things that he mentions in the book is that he wished that there would be a standardization and examination for people to become doctors. And this is something many people will be surprised. SubhanAllah, at the past, we know, since the Greeks and downwards, medicine was popular. But then it was the ebb and flow. Some people became doctors, some then it became not so praiseworthy to be a doctor. He talks about that as well because of the status, right? Doctors didn't always get paid so well. And he actually mentioned that the doctor at that time, often the doctor would need a second income, right? Many of us are like, SubhanAllah, right? Well, that's how it was, because he said some people into the field were not doctors. But what is interesting, when he died, the Ruhawi, in the year 1319, which is roughly the year that he died, or around that time, the Abbasi Khalifa al-Muqtadir, he actually passed the edict or a decree that no doctor would practice medicine in his Khilafah except that they would pass the medical exam. You'd have to pass Today we call residency, right? Like this. You have to pass here, you go to medical school. And this is very important to see Islam forerunning these topics, and many Muslims, they don't know about that. And of course, beyond that, attribution, right, about our successes. And you can study that day and night. But this is a very interesting book. In that book, it's in Arabic, you find a lot of interesting points about the doctor and the medicine and etc. So from that historical context, we go into what the Shaykh is mentioning here. Line 71, inshallah, to 75. It's shared in the group for those who want English. قال مؤلف رحمه الله ومكروه استئماننا أهل الذمة لإحراز مال أو لقسمته اشهدي. So here the author, he begins, it says, in line 71, it is disliked for us, i.e. us as Muslims in the Muslim lands, to seek the assistance or help from the people of the covenant, Ahlul Dhimma, to protect our wealth or distribute it, so bear witness to it. Here the author, he moves into a conversation about Muslims in Muslim countries, in the Muslim world. What is the position of the people of Dhimma, those in Dhimmatude, right, the Jews and Christians living underneath Islamic law or Islamic rule, paying the jizya tax? What is their positions? What role can they play? And we know Islam has governed them with rules and regulations. But here the question is, can they take power positions, leadership roles to do with wealth distribution, political power, economic trust? And the Shaykh says it shouldn't be the case. And this is the view of many of the scholars. And the reason why is because the Muslims in their Muslim country have more primacy to their positions over that of the non-Muslims. And the root issue to do with it is not to do with discrimination because they're not Muslims, because it has to do with trust. Muslims, we know, our deen teaches us a certain etiquette, certain ethics that the Muslim has to uphold. So put Muslims in Muslim power positions, this is what the ulama, they call to. So obviously the scholars, they differ. To what degree does that count? It means how far do we go with that? But the very idea is, if it's like a very big position, right, especially to do with the political realm, then those roles are reserved for the people of Islam. Right? This would not be controversial. For every country in the world, the most powerful positions are left to the majority. Right? No surprise there. But the essence for this argument is that they can still play different roles in society. But when it comes to things to do with wilayah, right, power and position, politics and governance, leave it to the Muslims. For example, the Imam, to be the Khalif or the Imam of the Muslims, min al-shurut, from the conditions of Islam. You have to be a Muslim to be a Muslim ruler. And that goes without saying. So the argument from this is something more general than medicine. But the proof for the argument that Muslims should be given primacy to those roles is the narration found in Muslim Imam Ahmad and authenticated by Imam Al-Albani in Irwa al-Ghalil, volume 8, page 255. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wrote to Umar ibn Khattab saying, "Inna li katiban nasraniyan." That verily I have a scribe who is a Christian. فقال, Umar said to him, "Ma laka qatalaka Allah." What's the matter with you? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or qatalaka Allah can be translated literally, may Allah destroy you, but it doesn't mean literally, may Allah destroy you. It's a statement of anger and rebuke. And why was Umar surprised by the fact that he had a Christian scribe? Because he says, Allah says in the Quran, "Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la tattakhidul yahuda wal nasara awliya, ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd." O you who believe, do not take the Jews and Christians as near alliances or allies, one over the other, one to another. And then he says, أَلَا اتَّخَذْتَ حَنِيفًا. Why didn't you take a Muslim in his position? فقال, قلت يا أمير المؤمنين. Abu Musa now responds saying, لي كتابته وله دينه. I only benefit from his expertise in writing, and for him is his religion. فقال Umar finished by saying, those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not honor, or none can honor except for Allah, and those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored them are honored. In other words, those who in our society are minorities living under our rule, they're not the same as the Muslim who has the positions of Tawheed and Islam, etc. They should be given priority. Now obviously it doesn't mean then that you can't have a Jewish, right, or a Christian doctor or support staff or anything inside a Muslim country. It means those positions which are of the highest of regard. And that's why Imam Ibn Qayyim in Ahkam Ahl al-Dhimma, when he explains the same narration, he says, قال الشيخ تقي الدين عن ابن تيمية في أول الصراط المستقيم, in the beginning of his كتاب اقتداء الصراط المستقيم. ولهذا كان السلف يستدلون بهذه الآية على ترك الاستعانة بهم في الولايات. He says here, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim's teacher, said, here the scholars used, the Salaf, to use the ayah, Surah Ma'idah, ayah 51, as proof for leaving off the need to seek assistance from the non-Muslims in that which is regarding Muslim governance or Muslim power positions. Wilayah specific is governance. So you can understand it doesn't mean then that in the Muslim society, Ahl Zimmah, that there is no role for them. No, rather the positions which have the highest rank should be given to the Muslims who are the majority, number one, and number two are the more reliable in their religion and in their ethics or in their etiquette, because we have the Quran and Sunnah as the governance that we use. And this same understanding was given by Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, in his ta'liq, his annotations on the Kitab Iqtida' Salat al-Mustaqim, tape number 4, side B. So Ibn Uthaymeen likewise mentioned that. And obviously you can understand the context where they're coming from, out of fear that certain secrets about the Muslims and their governance and their money will be disclosed, someone who is not one of them. Right? And you can understand today, if you study politics in the world, that this obviously makes sense. But this is not to do with medicine specifically. This is general. But then he moves from that generality to the issue of medicine in line 72, because the Shaykh now is trying to tell us that from that point comes the second point. If we should not give them positions of wilayah, what about positions of medicine? Right, this is the question now. He goes from here to here now. Line 72, he says, rahimahullah, the author, وَمَكْرُوهٌ إِسْتِطَابَهُمْ لَا ضَرُورَةً وَمَا رَكَّبُوهُ مِنْ دَوَاءٍ مُؤَصَّدٍ. He says, line 72, and is disliked to seek medical treatment from, i.e., the Jews or Christians, the Ahlul Zimmah, those living in the Muslim lands, except in relation to necessity and whatever they produced of concocted medicine. And what he means by this is that if we're in a Muslim country or a non-Muslim country, and we have the ability to go to a Muslim doctor, we should prioritize going to a Muslim doctor. And the reason why is because the Muslim doctor, at least in once upon a time, they were considered more reliable and also more understanding of the Muslim. So the idea is that the Muslim doctor, non-Muslim doctor, both are specialists. Who should you give your preference or who should you go for treatment? The idea is, the better one is to go to the Muslim doctor. This is what the ulama mentioned, better. And we understand why. It's because they took the issue to be about thiqah, yani reliability. So who is more reliable? Now obviously someone may say, well, that was the past. Now we don't know anymore, which is a good point, because times can change. So I said the Muslim doctor may not be so reliable. Right? And unfortunately, this is a situation where we find ourselves in. So we'll get to that point in a second. But the idea is that if you're in a Muslim country with Muslim doctors, especially at the time period where Muslims excelled in medicine, not only are they a majority, but their excellence in medicine gives us the priority, their expertise goes forward, and their religion. And sometimes even going to them with certain issues can be also better for the patient in terms of understanding. Example, Muslim going to a Muslim psychiatrist or psychiatrist or psychologist would be better because they understand the situation better, right? When they talk about things to do with their religion or jinn possession, they would understand more than the non-Muslim. So the ulama, they understood this to be a tight dislike. But if it's a necessity, then there's no harm whatsoever, because we know in necessities, things become halal which are haram. But he's not talking about nowadays. The Shaykh was talking his time, and that which preceded. When we said Muslims were leaders in medicine, we were the leaders. You wouldn't want to go except to a Muslim. But today, in the past, even time in Salaf, there was a decline in the medical expertise amongst Muslims. And the sad reality is that Muslims abandoned the subject in favor of others. And a good example is two statements from Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. Many of us may know Imam al-Shafi'i as this great Imam, one of the four Imams, master in Arabic, the founder of Usul al-Fiqh, right? Master fiqh, hadith, all these subjects. But he was also master in medicine. He was a doctor. And he said himself, ضَيِّعُوا ثُلُثُ الْعِلْمِ, right? 1/3 of knowledge has been wasted. وَكُّلُوا إِلَى الْيَهُودِ وَالنَّصَارَى, and has been given and entrusted to the Jews and Christians. And he said this when Imam Shafi'i was lamenting the weakness of Muslims in medicine. He said, we wasted 1/3 of knowledge by leaving this type of knowledge to the Jews and Christians. And that narration, he says, إِنَّ أَهْلَ الْكِتَابَ قَدْ غَلَبُونَ عَلَى الطِّبِّ. The people of the book have overcome us when it comes to the subject of medicine. Right? So obviously Imam Shafi'i, he's saying this as one who was from them, right, as doctors. So he was obviously noticing the downward trend. And you can find these statements in Manaqib al-Shafi'i of Ibn Hatim al-Razi, both isnad wa sahih. So with that context, Muslims, scholars, for the longest, if you read a fiqh manual off a shelf, it always says, and you should go to the reliable Muslim doctor. Always you hear these terms. But then today we say, fast forward now, we say, well, now the best doctors are in Germany and other places. The tables have turned. And it was happening before. Right? It was happening before as well. So there's no contradiction there, as we'll get to the answer. And you can also understand when Muslims were majority and minority was the Jews and Christians, that sometimes some Muslim doctors, non-Muslim doctors could have been, right, exploiting their expertise against the Muslims. And that's not far-fetched, right? That some of the doctors or Muslims weakened in subject of medicine, that somebody amongst the Jews and Christians would use this knowledge they have to maybe, right, give bad medical advice or bad medication. It's not far-fetched. How so? Till today we have this problem from Big Pharma. And I'll give you now a qissa, a narration. In the biography of the Imam Al-Maziri. Many of us, we don't know this Imam Al-Maziri, Al-Maliki, a scholar who, he was from Italy. Right? Most of us, we don't know. So Imam from Sicily. Imam from the A'imma of Hadith and Fiqh. From Mazzara del Vallo in Sicily, when Sicily used to be a Muslim country. Right? Many of you might not know, at the time, in the around 800, late 800s of Islam, Sicily became the Imara, the Emirates of Sicily, before Roger I came and took it over. And the Muslims ran over Italy for a couple of hundred years. Right? And he, according to Ibn Farhun al-Maliki, was a trustworthy Maliki historian. He says Imam Maziri was born in Italy before fleeing to Tunisia. There's two opinions. One was either from there, the other was from there. But what's unique is that an Italian scholar, right, many of us would be surprised, subhanAllah, we never heard about an Imam from Italy. But what's unique about Imam Maziri, from those ulama who lived later in North Africa, he's amongst the earliest to write the Sharh of Sahih Muslim. Many of us probably know Imam Nawawi has the explanation of Muslim, right? And before Imam Nawawi is Qadi Iyad. Qadi Iyad wrote a kitab Ikmal al-Mu'lim ala Sharh Sahih Muslim. But who wrote a Mu'lim? The first one, Maziri. So Maziri, then Qadi Iyad Nawawi. So it's very important. This Imam is a famous Imam from the ulama, but many people might not know that, so it's a nice point to be mentioned. What does Imam Maziri mention in his biography? Imam Zahabi writes in Sirah Alam al-Nubala, one day Imam Maziri became sick, and he went to a Jewish doctor to receive treatment. And after he became cured at the hands of the Jewish doctor, the Jewish doctor told him, if it wasn't for the fact that I would want to preserve my craft and profession as a medical doctor, I would execute or kill the Muslims through it. Imagine, his doctor telling him this. He said, if it wasn't for the fact I would protect my craft, his job, I would actually do that. And he used the medicine because we become ignorant. You could poison us. Imam Maziri, when he heard that statement, he became inspired to the medicine and became a doctor himself, rahimahullah, out of fear of that. Because he said he wasn't in a position of trust anymore. And this story obviously doesn't mean this is the majority. We're not going to say this is what's going on in the Muslim world. We're saying that this is one of the evidences or reasons why the scholars will often mention Muslim doctor. At the very least, reliability. However, so this is a kitab, this is found in Imam Zahabi, Sirah Alam al-Nubala, volume 20, page 104. If someone now asks the question, okay, but that was very, very different times than today. Today maybe we can say that Muslims, our medical professionals, they train in the West before going to the East because they have the expertise, as Imam Shafi'i was lamenting this point. Therefore, the scholars, they say, the situation where Muslim doctors are not only reliable, but are not as proficient, or the state where the non-Muslim doctors are reliable, despite their disbelief, as long as they're reliable, you're allowed to go to a doctor. Right? So this you don't have to worry now when you go to your local doctor or your family physician, if he's not Muslim, it's okay. Because the expertise revolves around what? Medicine. And this is the view of who? Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, who said, if a Jew or Christian is khabiran bitib, expert in the subject of medicine, ثقة عند الإنسان, reliable with the people, جاز له أن يستطبه كما يجوز له أن يعيده للمال أو يعامله. So Ibn Taymiyyah says it's allowed to take medical treatment from him, just as it's permissible for us to give him wealth to keep, or for him to work for us or to seek any kind of help from him. And this is also the view of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen of our times. In his Kitab al-Sharh al-Mumti', volume 4, page 342 to 343, the Shaykh actually mentions some of the scholars in the past would often say, if you're seeking medical treatment, you must go to a Muslim doctor who's reliable. And others would say Muslim. And the Shaykh explains, obviously, that this subject revolves around reliability, not so much religion. Because once upon a time, we know the religion was a sign of reliability. But we also know from the Hadith of Hudhayfa, Bukhari, a Muslim, that time has come, in his time, that people were not reliable in business. Except for a few people, he would name so-and-so and so-and-so, because this is the end of times, right? As time goes down, people are not reliable. We all know, you can't trust everybody. So what the issue then is, if whoever is reliable and is an expert in the field, then you're allowed to go to them for medical treatment. If it's a necessity, for example, that there's no choice, the guy is a specialist, no one else is, then you don't have an argument. But if you had the choice between two experts who are available to you, Muslim and non-Muslim, both equal accessible, then you prefer the Muslim, again from that idea that they're more trustworthy, more understanding. But then again, there's no sin in the one who goes to a non-Muslim doctor with expertise. And then Shaykh Uthaymeen brings a number of evidence to show that you can get help and benefit from the non-Muslims in worldly benefits. And he mentions that the whole subject revolves around reliability, because the non-Muslim doctors, he says, even though they may not be Muslims, they're disbelievers, they preserve their craft and they are trustworthy in their subject matter, not because of a religious reason, but rather to preserve their honor and their respect and credibility. And this is true, right? Today, if a medical doctor does some kind of unethical thing, we can take it to the board, he can lose his license or his standing, right? So therefore, the Shaykh mentions that this is okay, وَهُوَ قَوْلٌ رَاجِحٌ لِقُوَّةِ دَلِيلِهِ وَتَعْلِيلِهِ. Right? This is the strongest opinion due to the strength of its evidences and its rationale. So here we go, that it's okay. And alhamdulillah, most of us, we understand that, and we try to prioritize, right, one thing, but doesn't negate sin for the other, right? So if you prioritize one thing, doesn't mean you're doing sin if you don't do that. Because some places you cannot find a Muslim doctor, right? Sometimes there are other, and even sometimes it's hard to even get a doctor at all. So this is what the bottom line is. So there's line 72. And here, the Shaykh then moves on to the 73rd line, where he talks now about the woman going and seeking treatment from a doctor, i.e. a male doctor. He says, rahimahullah, وَإِن مَرِضَتْ أُنْثَى وَلَمْ يَجِدُ لَهَا طَبِيبًا سِوَى فَحْرٍ أَجِزْهُ وَمَهِّدِي. Yani he says, if a woman becomes sick, and they cannot find for her a doctor besides a male, then permit her to go to him. And this is something which is allowed in Islam. Again, now to do with the patient. As Muslims, we know a man and a woman should prioritize going to a doctor of the same gender. Because in Islam, the interaction between man and woman should be formal, and it should not involve any touching and seclusion, etc. But now in a situation where we cannot find that, or there's a need for it. For example, there's this specialist in this field, it's only a woman for a man, or vice versa. And the ulama allow that. So we have then two things. That which is preferable, and that which is the rule, unless there's a need or necessity. So now the problem is, as we said, sometimes in some particular medical issues, you can't find too many, right? Diversity or gender, right? Equality, men and women are always there, available. You may get this doctor or that doctor, depending on the availability or speciality. So what a Muslim should do is try to look and try their best. وَلَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. However, the idea the author wants us to take is that a woman can seek a treatment, or seek treatment from a man, a male, non-mahram, who is not her direct relative, just like and a man and vice versa. And this is also the view of Imam Ibn Muflih and others from the Hanabila and other scholars. In the Mawsu'a Fiqhiyya it states that the Quran and Sunnah clearly shown. And before we get there, we have to understand why the prohibition was there in something like as an origin. So originally, seeking medical treatment is not something you do unless you have to go there, right? It's a need. Usually when you go for medical treatment, it's a need. But before you go to medical treatment, you have to also look for the available treatment and people are available. So if a woman is available for a woman, it would make no sense and there's no need for her to go to the male. You see, this is a problem we have today. Some people say, well, what can we do? Right, well, first of all, you check. Right? Alhamdulillah, there's lots of choice. It's not just that easy. On top of that, many people would also not be comfortable by sending their female relatives to a male doctor. And he's standing outside the door. Would not be comfortable with that, or he will stand in the room. Unless, we said before, there's no way out of it. We couldn't find anyone else. Or this doctor is the best in the subject, and there's no harm there. So the ulama, they mentioned this, majority mentioned this is permissible. And why is it permissible in need? Because now the question is it permissible due to a need, haja or darura? Right? They have to differentiate now, right, brothers? Right? There's a difference between a need and a necessity. Is a need like a necessity? No. Now, sometimes you could make a need just like a necessity, but not always. Right? Some people, they live like that. Every need is a necessity. And this is problematic from an usuli perspective, and also the conclusions that you come up with. But in Islam, we know a haja is something which you don't need it to survive, but if you didn't have it, it would be difficult in your life. That's a haja. A darura, a necessity, is that which, if not taken, will severely harm your deen or your dunya. Or some ulama say, close to death even. Life or death situation, that's clear necessity. So you have to differentiate the two. Because in our society, the ulama say, and this is what usually they mention, Imam Shatibi Rahimah and others, there are three things in life we usually have. Tahsiniyat, the luxuries of life. You don't need them, right? But we want them. The haja, the difficulties Islam has come to prevent from you. And when they arise, for the most part, Islam allows you to get away from them by ease. For example, you can't stand for prayer, sit down. It's haja. But then there's some hajat you don't need, just makes annoyance or maybe difficulty, but you can still survive comfortably. And then darura, life or death or necessity, which your deen will be affected, or your dunya. You be halak, you lose everything. Or for example, someone, if they didn't engage in this, they will die. Or the family member will die, etc. So we get these levels. You have to know there's three levels. So tahsiniyat are considered like luxuries. What happens if you don't know this? You make them all the same. I need it. It means you want it. And sometimes necessity is a want. Sometimes necessity is a need. Sometimes a need becomes necessity. And so when they talk about these things, they're just mixing it up. Or the usuliyun, they never did that. طيب, the ulama, they mentioned, then if there's a need to go to the doctor, then no problem. But first we have to understand if there's a darura, there's a necessity. That one we all agree. For example, a woman has to go to the male doctor for delivery. She's in the midst of labor. Cannot be saying, let's go find a male woman doctor. It's not time for that, right? We have to find a doctor. So we can understand that. But then what about haja? For example, you have a need, you want to go and get a specific treatment done. Do I have to be more picky in that angle? Should I look around and say, oh no, I don't want the male, I want only female. If you have the option, it's great. If you don't, that's haja. Because you still need that treatment. Right? For example, a test or a scan. But then there are times when it's just your own want. So the ulama, they say this is permissible for a need and a want. Necessity. And the reason why it's permissible is because the doctor, when he goes with the opposite gender, number one thing that's going to happen is that they're going to be in seclusion. That's the first issue. Number two, probably touching, right? He has to touch the place, his body or her body. Or thirdly, seeing the awrah, right? Al-maratu awrah, for example, she would take off her hijab or literally show a part of her body. Or sometimes it has to be the private parts himself, right? Sometimes it could be that's the area of consideration. So therefore, looking at the private parts or the private area of a person is not allowed for a man to look at a man's private part nor a woman to a woman illa bid-darura or haja. So we can understand then that it's a need. Why? Someone will say, I want to understand this. Looking at someone's awrah is haram li ghayrihi or li dhatihi. Right? Brothers, we have to know this point because it also helps you to understand some things in Islam that sometimes escape us. In Islam, things are haram either for one of two reasons. Something's haram li dhatihi in and of itself, or haram li ghayrihi, due to something else. It's very important. This is just like when you think about haram, something haram in and of itself. There's something which is haram due to it leading to something else, which is haram in and of itself. This is important. This topic, the ulama, they often discuss and debate. Which one is tahrim, haram, li dhatihi, li ghayrihi? Because based on where you build that bridge, you can come to a ruling. I'll give you an example, because it's not an usul class, but we'll give you the example. Pork. Eating pork is haram لذاته, in of itself. Not لغيره. So we don't say it's haram to eat pork because it's going to give bad breath. No, it's haram to eat pork because pork is najas, period. Whatever happens after consumption is part of this, is haram. That's why the pork is severely prohibited, right? We don't know of a time when you can eat pork except necessity. So what's the farq between tahrim لغيره wa tahrim لذاته? If something's prohibited in and of itself, it's only allowed due to necessity. Now take this rule, this qa'idah. And it's something which is prohibited due to another reason, halal li haja. It's allowed for necessity, need. It's a qa'idah, it's very important. Something which is haram, tahrim لذاته, means haram in and of itself, it can never be made permissible illa bidarura, except by necessity. And something which is haram لغيره, due to another cause, due to something else. It is haram due to something else, comes permissible due to a need. So two ways things are made haram in Islam, how Allah made things haram. He made something haram in and of themselves, and something else made haram due to leading to something else, which is haram in and of itself. So I'll give you the example I gave of pork. Pork is haram in and of itself. So somebody cannot consume pork or use it illa bid-darura, life or death. Right? So therefore, if someone says, but then, I want to use nowadays I don't know what people are doing with the pork, but they do certain things, they use the byproducts or other things. We say if it's a necessity, it's different. Need is not, we have alternatives. Another example is zina, haram li dhatihi. Zina is absolutely haram, adultery and fornication. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And then when it comes to darura, there's no darura there. Well, there's a khilaf sometimes. Maybe you could argue if somebody is in a real, I don't know what situation they're going to be in, life or death. But that issue, right? The Usuli, when they go to the example, sometimes you wonder, did it ever happen before like this? But the idea, you get it. There's no time zina is allowed. You don't do it, you stay away from it. Now, let's look at the other example. لِغَيْرِهِ would be like nadar. Looking at someone's private part, it's haram لِغَيْرِهِ. Why? You're not allowed to look at the awrah of someone, or their private parts, or a woman, man looking at a woman, except for a need, not only necessity. Necessity, we agree. For example, the doctor has to deliver the baby. He's a male doctor. She's in need. That one we all agree. It's necessity. We all agree. She's going to possibly die or the child will die. We agree to this. How about need? Is there ever a time we have to look at a woman with the need? Is there ever a need for looking at a woman? Yes? Yeah, when you're going to get married. We took that before. You can see her hair. Why can you see her hair? This is what people get stuck. Because haram لغيره لذاته. But a lot of people, they don't know. They say only the first night. I say, Shaykh, what's going on here? If you go this way, what's wrong? The problem is لغيره. The nadar has a haja. We need to see someone, how they look. Also, example like medicine. The doctor can only examine the place of the medication if he can look at it. If we say it's tahrim لذاته, he can't see it. How is he going to treat it? So from here, the scholars, they move from this principle. It's important. Some of them use different terminologies. They use terminology like maqasid, and they use the terminology of wasa'il. Right? Both the same thing, same meaning. Ibn Qayyim, beautifully, I'lam Waqi'in, he actually mentions 99 proofs in the Kitab and Sunnah for something which means haram due to another reason. Allahu Akbar. That Kitab, I'lam Waqi'in, Ibn Qayyim, one of the greatest books he ever wrote, rahimahullah. It's a master class, a book of usul and hikam and mahasin al-Islam. If you read that book, you will love Islam. That book is amazing, and what it brings in there. But he mentioned 99 things in Islam made haram due to other reasons. And he shows you the wisdom behind it. And one of those, he says, haram to look at the opposite gender because it leads to zina, which is haram in of itself. Haram for a man, the woman to be in seclusion, or a woman to adorn herself because it leads to the zina. All this, so they can get the point. So what we take from this now, going back all the way now from this principle usul, now let's go back to the discussion of medicine. The doctor has a male doctor and a woman patient. If there's a need, then it's allowed because it's haram لغيره. But if it's a necessity, and we're going to get to the next one, like the pregnancy, then, we have not clearly. Another example would be, it's not allowed for the doctor to touch the woman, or a male doctor to touch a woman doctor touch a man. But if there's a need for it, like medical treatment, or necessity, then you have to do it. Example, someone collapsed in front of you, you need CPR, opposite gender, what do we do? Someone will say, we can't touch it, it's haram. This person's going to die. Right? So then that's unacceptable, right? So it's haram to touch them, but there's the darura now. Okay, different. And that's why the ulama passed the fatwa. Then situations, someone collapsed, or a woman or a man is dying in the CPR, and you know it, you have to participate to save a life. But people, some might be thinking in their head, but it's haram, I can't do it. And that's why sometimes in our mind, haram is so haram, maybe you don't ever envision ever a time it's allowed. And it's a problem, because maybe you might find amazing things like that, where somebody will need medical treatment, and because of our misunderstanding of the deen, we might not give it them. So obviously, I don't believe most people are in that boat, but you can see how Islam comes beautifully to fit these issues. So the bottom line, I've always said right now, a woman can go to a male doctor, a male can go to a woman doctor if there's a need or necessity. And I just didn't finish it. Ibn Abdul Salam, Ibn Abdul Salam, in Qawaid, he says, you can see the awrah for a need, and he mentioned that what Brother Hamza mentioned, for the looking at the woman for the marriage. And then he says from also the needs, or look when it comes to treatment. He called it haja. And later he calls darura, for example, amputation or something like this, which is important kind of benefit. A question says, can a woman go to a female for such things as waxing? All right, so now obviously it comes now to the issue, is this something actually which is a need or not? Right, for the general rule, the ulama, in these kind of situations, they examine what kind of treatment is it. Is it a need, or is it something with to do with zina? So if it's something like zina, for example, waxing is from the zina. Unless someone's waxing some part which is must to wax, or it's important in Islam too. So we can find examples like in the Sharia. So it boils down to what is it? Example we find, some of the scholars will discuss the issue of using laser hair removal. And they said it's not allowed because it's not a need or medical necessity, it's zina. And we said something haram لغيره only becomes haram when? Haja or darura. Is the zina haja darura? No, it's not. That's just because you want to look nice. And you can do it yourself with the home's laser system or something. These ones you can buy. Just like you can wax yourself at home. So you see that's not, I would say this one, from what we understand, what I read before, it's not from that category. But if we were to imagine there was something, right, and I'll give you an example. Imam Ahmed, rahimahullah, the Hanabila they spoke about. Imam Ahmed, they asked him a question. Right, they mentioned in the Sharh Imam Al-Hajjawi, he mentioned the explanation in this poem, that at the time of Imam Ahmed and Marudhi, he said that some of the women, they go to the man in the street who sells them kuhul, and what's understood from it, he also probably puts it in their eyes too. Right, so that actually was a job, or a seller who sells the kuhul, right, for the eyes, and he will actually put it in their eyes. So they were saying, how can he sell it with them? Is it an ikhtilat going on, or khalwa? He says he's on the street. Everyone can see him. And also he understood that to be kind of a need. So you can understand that maybe somebody who can't maybe do these things, it could be understood. If he's waxing in place, maybe he has to do it, right? The parts where we know the pubic region or the underarm, someone has to do it once every 40 days. But for the most part, waxing is not done like that. Usually, sometimes it's done as zina. And the problem also is that we have alternatives. So we should not open that door. And that's why the ulama are really strict about that, because it starts like that, and then people are going there and they're doing all kind of other treatments, because the awra mughallada, the serious awra, should never be uncovered except for those two needs. It's very, very important. Unfortunately, in our time, there's a lot of leniency. Okay, line 74, we'll take now. With the author, it talks about another type of medical treatment. وَيُكْرَهُ حَقْنُ الْمَرْءِ إِلَّا ضَرُورَةً وَيَنْظُرُ مَا يَحْتَاجُهُ حَاقِنٌ قَدِي. Now he talks about that it's disliked to inject. The word inject here, we're going to actually examine it. Does it mean injection, or does it mean something else? So we'll use just the word inject for now. It's just like to inject a person except due to necessity, and let the one performing the injection only look according to what is needed. What is meant by this word, right? Haqun. Here, the ulama, they're talking about ihtiqan, which is a word that's used for many meanings. One of them is a type of medical treatment where the sick person will have medicine put into their body by way of an injection or some kind of funnel. And so it could mean many things. So we use the word injection because literally it's used as this is the word for injection. So it could be injection. But that's not the meaning I think is mafhum here. Here he's talking about when a patient goes to the doctor for an enema, right, to get some kind of treatment put into the colon from the backside, this kind of treatment. This is what he's talking about more. Because one of the meanings in Mawsu' al-Fiqhiyya is that one of the treatments is when someone has, right, medication put from their backside into their body due to a need. Or, for example, flushing the colon. This is what is specific, because that's a type of injection or insertion. Because the meaning, again, has more than one meaning. So some of the scholars say it depends on what kind of enema you're talking about. It has to do with the urine. Does it have to do with the colon? Does it have to do with the vein or the injection? So depending on what you're doing, the hukum, the ruling will change. What is understood, wallahu a'lam here, the reason why the author mentioned it is for that meaning I mentioned now. It's to do with the colon. Because to someone to go to the doctor with no need is haram, they say. If someone needs, for example, to have their colon examined or flushed, then they can do it permissible. Why? Because it's medication. إِلَّا ضَرُورَةٍ. But if we were to imagine someone doing without that reason, it's haram. There is no doubt about that, because it's exposing the awrah to one who shouldn't see it. And that's Al-Mawsu' al-Fiqhiyya Kuwaitiyya, Volume 2, page 83 to 90. He says, وَمَنَعَ الْعُلَمَاء النَّظَرِ الْعَوْرَةِ إِلَّا فِي حَالَاتِ الضَّرُورَةِ التي تختلف باختلاف الأحوال. That the ulama have agreed the prohibition of looking at the awrah, the private areas of another person, except for in the situation of necessity, which differ according to time and place, or time to time. And this is underneath the subject of ihtiqan. So what we take from this is that if we understood this way, enema, then this is what's meant. Otherwise, there is nothing wrong with injecting someone with a medication or taking blood or etc. Right? So it's important because, again, going back to ishfa awrah. So if it's exposed in the awrah for a need, permissible. For darura, necessity, permissible. No need, no necessity, not permissible. Last one, line 75, the author says, and talking about the midwife. Now he gives the example of the last one to this one. He says, كَقَابِلَةٍ حِلٌّ لَهَا نَظْرٌ إِلَى مَكَانِ وِلَادَةِ النِّسَاءِ فِي تَوَلُّدِ. That like this, an example is the midwife, who it is permissible for her to look at the place of birth, i.e. the birth canal, a woman's private parts, during birth. So it goes without saying, a midwife, that's her job, right? She helps the woman give birth. So by extension, it's allowed for her to look at the woman who's the mother when she's giving birth, to look at her private area to help her. Now again, go back to the last discussion we have. If there's no male doctor or female doctor, then you go to the male doctor due to the need. But the job of the al-qabiratu, and al-qabira is this midwife. And this is a job which was known in time of the Salaf until today. Midwifery is a type of medical professional, right, which is necessary in our community, right? One of those things the ulama advise women to study midwifery. Because in our communities, we don't have a lot of them, right? So when a woman have to give birth, there's not many Muslim women to participate. But the ulama, they discuss that. Again, in Mawsu' al-Fiqhiyya, it says the ulama, they hold the view that it is permissible for the midwife to look at the awrah of the woman during time of birth. And it's permissible for her also to touch that area due to the need. And Ahmed held the view that if it must be a Muslim midwife, not Jew or Christian. Because in his view, he held the view that a Muslim woman can only be seen without hijab by a Muslim woman. Again, Ahmed had this view, other madhab didn't agree with him. They held the view in the ayah in Surah Nur, ayat hijab, any woman can see another woman without her hijab, i.e. her hair, for example, or those parts, because they understood the ayah to be general, not specific. But based on that, he held that view. But of course, the other scholars, they didn't agree. But the bottom line is, that one we all agreed. I don't think anyone has any confusion about that. But the idea of the midwife is that it's a job which is important. Right? In the time of the Salaf, it was known. And so they held this view that it's permissible because it's stemming from the idea that seeing that private area is permissible in times of need and necessity. And likewise, if there's no midwife and she has to give birth at the hospital with a male doctor and that's all that's available, then due to necessity it's permissible. Right? But again, where does the midwife or doctor look? Only in the region which is necessary. Right? So that's important to notice. And for the most part, it's female-dominated, right, the maternity ward. So that is because of now also the comfort of the woman as well is taken into serious consideration. For the most part, it's a female-dominated, right, field. And this is what it is. And so here we take a benefit that Islam allows medical treatment for people because the necessity of preservation of life is a very big deal. And I'll finish with this point, because next week he has more lines on this topic, and we'll cover. In Islam, if you notice everything that's being said here, a lot of allowances and concessions for these kind of practices. Why? Because in Islam, from the five, we mentioned before, the five overall maqasid, we call them the five necessities, right, that Islam came to protect. Right, this is important. 5 necessities, which is, you can call them the big or the wider, the major maqasid. Right? The ulama, they mentioned one of them, and the most of them important after the deen, is the life of a person. Preservation of life. Of course, when the scholars, we mentioned in Qawa'id Fiqhiyya, the scholars, they categorize these objectives, Sharia objectives. Number one being deen, preservation of deen, then preservation of life. So in Islam, someone's life, their health is serious business. So therefore, the concessions are allowed. The halal is made there when there's a need, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His beautiful names, is At-Tabib. Some of us may not know this. Hadith Sahih, Abu Dawood and others. Allahu At-Tabib. Allah is the doctor. And He's the one who has the cure, for Shafi. And from this we see, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He allowed in our Sharia for medicine to prevail and medical treatment to be made easy. And we have to think deeply about it, because the ulama, they didn't just stop there. Today there's books, researchers on the most delicate subject of medical treatments, confidentiality, ethics, so many topics of medicine today, the new stuff that comes out, which treatments are allowed, which are not. But what governs these rulings? This idea that the objective of the Sharia is preservation of life. So Islam didn't come to block that door. And unfortunately, other faith traditions, you may find that they're anti-medication. All right? You have some people who say they're religious and they don't give their children medication. We say Islam is not allowed. Or some, they will say certain medication is not allowed at all. There is never a conceivable time for its permissibility. Islam, no. And this is the mahasin al-deen, ikhwani. Because many times we look and we find that people, they look at Islam as something rigid. They don't understand. Islam, what underpins it is all these principles and objectives, which are harmonious, but it's us to fail to understand it because we're looking from the outside, not from inside out. If you're inside, you can understand. If you're outside, you don't get it. But also we have to understand how Islam also comes to deal with the issues that we're dealing with. The ulama talk about things that are real. And this is beautiful, because if you study this subject alone, not only will you notice how beautiful the rules are, but also the primacy and the expertise that ulama had in this subject. Why were they experts? What inspired them to learn medicine? Like we said, Imam Shafi'i praised medicine. What inspired them? Hadith, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in Hadith Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't ever send down a disease except He sent down a cure. عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ وَجَهِلُهُ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ وَجَهِلُهُ مَنْ جَهِلَهُ. And whoever knows it, knows it. Whoever doesn't know it, doesn't know it. This hadith, Imam Zahabi and others, when they comment on the hadith, they said this hadith inspired the ulama to study the medicine. عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَهُ. What does that mean? Whoever knows it, i.e. medicine, knows it. Sharaf, it's a sharaf, it's honor. And the one who's ignorant of it, turned away is ignorant of it. So it encouraged us to go and study medicine. And this shows you again, the Sharia, how it helps us forward in the progression of humanity. Right? This is very important, because when you look at Islamic books in history, again, there's a book called Tabaqat al-Atibba. Tabaqat, the ulama used to write books before. Tabaqat al-Hanabila, Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya. Scholars wrote books about the series and the levels of scholars of each madhab. There's a book, Tabaqat al-Atibba, the serial biographies of the doctors of Islam. And if you see how big the book is, you will say so sad. How many it used to be and how things are today. And also, we can also benefit from this, that when we go to the doctor now, we have a little more guidelines. So we don't just go in there and ask the doctor or whatever, or we don't actually consider our deen. Right? Our deen, alhamdulillah, doesn't leave us at the door. Everything you need is there. Okay, inshallah, we'll end with this much, and it's close to salah time. Anyone has any questions on this, inshallah, we'll take them. Yes.
Within the ruqya, a lot of times what happens is, you see a lot of athletes, they will have females come in for ruqya, and a lot of times it's expected that they will get possessed, like just looking at the symptoms, and they do get possessed. And a lot of times the situation is that the raqi then has to make physical contact because things are getting out of hand. And when they're asked about this, they make the same, they present the same evidence as the permissibility of a woman being able to see a male doctor under necessity. So they apply that same in that scenario.
Well, that's the thing. When it comes to medicine, well, we know this. And ruqya, we understand it is a type of medication or a type of medical treatment, Islamically. But the idea is that ruqya with a male and woman, this opens a big door of fitna, especially when we can also have the mahram there. It's not like it's impossible. Right? If he needs to restrain her, he can have her there. If he needs to read on her, he can read with, and he can blow. Right? He doesn't have to touch. So a lot of them, they come with this, and it gets really out of hand, right? Because sometimes it's just like there's no longer a need. Right? For example, if someone said the need was to restrain, then where's the husband or the brother to come? So sometimes just one-on-one. Right? And the ruqya and the raqi nowadays, many times, the raqi, we don't know what he's doing. Allah knows if it's ruqya or not. Sometimes you can't tell. So there's a lot of exploitation that could occur. So for those reasons, the ulama are very discouraging of that. That the ruqya should be done preferably by a woman, so a woman, man to man. But if there's a need, for example, no one knows ruqya except for him, then the presence of her mahram, and then he can do ruqya without need to touch. He can blow and he can recite. This is what the Quran is being cured by that, not by the blows. That's not, you forget, the blows are not what's curing. It's the Quran you're reading and the blowing. And this is what's very important, because sometimes in that state when the woman is in, or man is under the influence of the jinn, things could happen which could constitute assault, and we could not recall it because it's a time of this, under this guise, many things happen. So this should be avoided, and this is not the case, because we said before, need and necessity. Consider need and necessity, fil ruqya, to touch? No. Right? When we know the sunnah way, and we know the permissible way. For example, permissible things is to use at times, to use force, to restrain or to beat. But that's permissible, not a must. For example, someone cannot say ruqya is invalid if he didn't touch the person. Right? And so this is problematic already, and we could see Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, all the ruqya he did, we don't have that. So this is very important to avoid it, and to be very careful also for the women to be very careful, because they're the ones who are going forward to the raqi often alone, and this is very dangerous, and you should think twice about that. Because ruqya itself is a science governed by the deen, alhamdulillah. So this is how we should deal with it. Because medical treatment, as you said, only when there's need and necessity, which involves the looking and the touching to that which needs to be looked at and touched. If it doesn't, then no, it cannot be done either. Allahu a'lam. Anyone else have any questions? Yeah. So haja, we said, means a need. It's not life or death. It's something which makes your life difficult or has some kind of obstacle. Well, you can still go around it. You can still live. All right? Just maybe the comfort level is going to go down. So Sharia inbuilt, the Sharia removes the hajat already. And it fulfills your hajat and haraj is gone. ما جعل الله في دين حرج. I know haraj in deen, right? But let's assume there's a haraj. I need a doctor. All I got is these doctors. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding of Sharia, that need can be taken into consideration. However, needs should not be made into necessities. This is where the problems are. Because some will say need is not life or death, but there is a principle that is being abused by some, that the needs can take the position of necessities. It's a principle, but not the way some people have understood it. They just take every time there's a need, they make it like a level of necessity. Necessity is life and death. So for example, someone will come and say like, I need to do this haram thing, or this thing which is haram lidatihi, because remember, they don't even know the haram lightihi. They do something haram lidatihi, and they make it halal lihaja. They say, what are you doing? He said, how am I going to live in this country? How are you going to live in this country the same way how you came to this country? Right? How you live back home? You have to live according to Kitab and Sunnah. The Sharia doesn't change when you cross the border. And unfortunately, some people, they come with these things, and what happens is there's slippery slope. It's a sliding scale. They started off with certain things, and you start justifying the worst. In fact, if we have time, we'll explain how it can be abused to a level where the thing which is absolutely haram became halal somehow. So we have to be careful. If it's a haja, only when there is a haja. And if we're not sure, what do we do? فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. This is the biggest problem. Had people asked the ulama first, or people of knowledge, it will solve it for you. Like if you're confused, I don't know, ask somebody, get some feedback. But what we do today, we make our own fatwa. Because at the end of the day, I'll be honest, most times it's all luxuries. Most of what we're fighting with tahsiniyat. Allah blessed us so much, but we have to be careful. So this is the difference between the two. And we have to be careful from leniency. Leniency in the wrong places. Any other questions? Otherwise, all right, so almost time for salah. Yes.
So like a need, for example, in our circumstances where we have to get vaccinated, you go to the vaccination clinic and every single person administering the vaccine is a woman. So would it
Exactly. For example, now you need to go get to the doctor to get the vaccine. It's a need. And for some people, it's a necessity. Maybe their health is very compromised. And when they go there, it's all female doctors or nurses. This is a need. They have to, you get it and you leave. Again, and if you found a place where there's men there, great. But the vast majority of us are not there. So we're not going to say forego the vaccine for that. Because this is what people are looking for. I can't do it. It's all women. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prioritize life. And this is exactly the kind of logic we have nowadays because people are not thinking straight. Not to say that the issue of the vaccine is the issue here. We're talking about that kind of situation. We're not prioritizing properly. And what happens is you find someone doing this, but truth be told, it's not what Islam is saying. Islam is very different than what you want to do. I have to be careful. Hukmullah is serious business. Allah's ruling about something is serious business. Whereas if I say, okay, my personal take on it, which could be absolutely flawed and wrong, I'm accountable in front of Allah if I want to go and I harm myself or I do things like this. But what people are not getting is that, imagine today you're telling people this. You can't do it. This is not hukmullah. Another example we didn't mention, but we mentioned the idea of zina, right? And a big one that's also contentious is riba. Right? And that's the same type. Haram li dhatihi, right? Li dhati, not li ghayrihi. And so if you understand what I mean by that, this is where the problems come. Riba is haram li dhati, not li ghayrihi. So haja is not going to make a halal to get a mortgage or riba. Not haja, you need a darura. But unfortunately, like I said, the abuse of this principle of putting needs to necessities made that permissible. So if you understand what we mentioned today, brothers and sisters, you go on to the different websites, you see the fatwa, now you can understand, how they can reach that fatwa. But also you can understand why it's wrong and how you won't be confused by it. Because unfortunately what's happening today, like I said, some people, not all, are using these principles in ways that are not correct, and me and you may not be aware of it, and we get confused. What's got it? He said something kind of makes sense, and we have to say, wait a minute, this is not so easy. Any last questions? Otherwise, we'll end. Inshallah. Next week we'll go from line number 76, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.